Well, hi, my name's Pastor Paul, and I, as Craig said, serve at Trinity Lutheran Church, and I wanted to send greetings from them to you, and thank you that we get to do this. This is a lot of fun for us as pastors to come around and meet different people, different congregations, and I hope it's enjoyable for you too. We're doing this theme, as you found, called A Change Of, and then we're filling in the blanks. In my case, it's going to be a story about a change of place. And I'll begin with a story about that from the Bible, and I'm going to be reading Jonah selections from chapters 1 through 3. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, "Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah set out to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid his fare and went on board to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a mighty storm came upon the sea that the ship threatened to break it up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried to his God. They threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. The sailors said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, so that we may know on whose account this calamity has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us why this calamity has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you?" "I am a Hebrew," he replied. "I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were even more afraid and said to him, "What is this that you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them so. So they picked Jonah up and threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, and the Lord spoke to the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon the dry land. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, "Get up and go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the message that I tell you." So Jonah set out and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. So I want to start this sermon by telling you a little story about how I ended up in this area, being a pastor. I had been waiting on a phone call for weeks when it finally came. And this was going to be the phone call where I would find out where I would be assigned for my first pastoral call. I was still in seminary for a few more months during this time. And months before this, I had filled out a large document called a rostered minister's profile, which any ELCA pastor could tell you about. It's something you write to describe the kind of person you are and the kind of ministry setting that you see yourselves thriving in. And so, again, you describe who you are and kind of what you hope to end up in. And you won't necessarily get exactly what you request, but the idea is that you'll probably end up somewhere that reflects your profile. So my profile was a very large document, as they all are, but I still remember some of the characteristics that I said would best match my gifts and experiences. And I wanted to share 3 of them with you. Number 1, I said that I hoped I would end up in a place near the coast. Hopefully the West Coast, because this is where my family's lived. I grew up in Southern California. Number 2, I talked about my feeling that I would do well in a very large urban setting. Again, being from Los Angeles, this is what I knew, and heck, I could do ministry in a setting that I understood so well. And then lastly, I said, I had lived abroad twice, and again, grown up in Los Angeles, where there's lots of multilingual stuff, so maybe a very diverse, multilingual setting would be great. And so the phone rang that day, and I picked up the phone, and on the other end, I heard a man say, "Hi, I'm Bishop Mark Narum." And I didn't know who he was or where he was from, so I said enthusiastically, "Hi." And then he said, "I'm calling to tell you that you've been assigned to Western North Dakota Synod." And I think I responded with something like, "Okay." And for the next few minutes, he went on to describe the synod and the area and the process that lay ahead as I would be placed here for my first call. And I have absolutely no memory what he said to me because I was freaking out the entire time. The truth is, when I wrote my profile, North Dakota was not something I had in mind. Again, I knew I might not get exactly what I wanted. I might not end up in California, but maybe, Arizona, Oregon, Washington, something nearby, maybe Colorado. But North Dakota, I remember thinking as he talked to me, what in my paperwork suggested I should be sent to North Dakota? Well, I finished the call, and I told my wife, who was around immediately, Stephanie. I went up to her, and I said, well, we've been assigned to western North Dakota. And she was braver than me. She said, it'll be okay, honey. And I went, ugh, and walked away. And then I called my best friend who was in seminary, Matt, and I told him he knew what I had wanted. And I said, well, Matt, I've been assigned to North Dakota. And there was silence on the other end of the line for a few moments. And then he kind of pulled himself together and said, well, congratulations on a call to God's church. And I said, thanks, and I hung up. Now, before I go on, it's important for me to emphasize, as I will later in this sermon, that I had nothing against North Dakota specifically. My problem wasn't that I had a negative opinion of North Dakota. My problem was I had no opinion of North Dakota. And I can't emphasize enough, as again I will later, that this has turned out to be a wonderful place to live and a wonderful call. But back then, all I knew about North Dakota was it was probably north of South Dakota, that I had no friends within a few thousand miles or family, and that it was probably really cold. And I was right about the last part especially. Otherwise, I knew nothing about it. And it's been said that the scariest thing to know about something is nothing. Because when you know nothing, the mind fills in the gaps with scary things. And this is something I've found to be true. That's why in horror movies, it's not like the whole time is just monsters running out at you. It's lots of empty hallways and empty rooms. Well, as I hung up the phone and started thinking about what would happen, my mind filled in the blanks with scary what-ifs. What if the people don't like me? What if I don't like my new home? What if I'm too different from the people to be able to do ministry effectively? What if I fail my first call? What if it's boring there? And what about the winters and the snow? So anyways, suffice to say, I was extremely anxious and doubtful that this new place I was being called was the place that I should be called. But ultimately, when I filled out this big paperwork, at the very end, there was a line that you either tick a box or you don't that says, I am open to wherever the church calls me. And I ticked the box. And so even though I did so with trepidation, eventually I said, okay, I'm going to accept this call, see what happens. I interviewed at Trinity and ended up there. But do you know what? What we discovered is that this place is a wonderful place to do ministry. And my family and I have been so blessed by the people here and by the opportunities and by the community and wonderful place to raise kids. And heck, we've even found that Bismarck is a tremendously diverse place if you go looking for it. And so I had been so worried that North Dakota might not be the right place to hear God's calling. But God surprised us. And I think for me, the deeper truth that I realized wasn't just that North Dakota is a good place to hear God's call, but it's that every situation is an opportunity to hear God's call, even the hard ones, even the unexpected ones. As you might imagine, I can resonate somewhat with the story of Jonah, which is the story of a prophet who doesn't want to go where God is calling him. God tells him his calling is in a new place, to a place called Nineveh. Nineveh, by the way, was the enemy people to the Israelites, right? They were always in battle, at war, and Jonah didn't want to go to the enemy and preach to them. And so essentially he says, no, God, I don't want to go there. You have it wrong. And actually he doesn't say anything. He just quietly gets into a boat and goes the complete opposite way. Apparently Tarshish was something like Spain, right? So Nineveh's this way and he goes that way. And it doesn't work out, right? He gets swallowed by a fish and that eventually convinces him. But I think on some level, all of us eventually experience this dynamic. In one way or another, life dumps us in a situation where we don't want to be. Maybe it's a literal place. Maybe it's a move to a new community or a new school, a new job, a new living situation. Or maybe it's not a new place literally, but a new place figuratively, a new situation. Maybe it's a situation of loss, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job or an ability, the loss of an opportunity or the loss of health, maybe just a crisis that comes along in your life in one way or another. And what I'm talking about here basically is change. And change for humans, as we all know, whether it's good or bad or just new, it tends to be difficult. It tends to throw us for a loop. In fact, people who study human psychology have discovered that most people would prefer familiarity even over happiness, right? That's why humans will make the same mistakes over and over. That's why we'll go into the same situations that we know is bad for us over and over, because we'd rather stick with things that don't work that we know than have to deal with change. Humans tend to distrust change. And when change happens that we don't like, it can be really, really hard to hear God's call. I think for me, one of the most important spiritual breakthroughs that I've had is to realize that there is no place, though, that lacks God's presence or God's call. The place I'm in and the place you're in may be lots of things, whether good or bad. It may be full of hardship. It may be an unexpected place. It may be a lonely place, but that doesn't mean that God isn't there. In fact, the story of the Bible, and especially the story of Jesus, is the story of a God who likes to show up in places of hardship, who especially wants to show his love in places of where we're not expecting it and where we're experiencing hardship. That's what the cross is about, right? God showing up in the place of most hardship. In fact, many times I think the places of greatest hardship are actually the places also of greatest calling. In my time here, I've gotten to know a lady named Sister Kathleen, a really wonderful woman. You may have heard of her. She runs a program called Ministry on the Margins, a wonderful ministry that especially cares for people who have been imprisoned and their families. And it does all kinds of stuff. It runs food pantries. It has times of hospitality. It connects people with spiritual and mental support. It runs Bible studies, just all kinds of stuff. It's helped hundreds, probably thousands of people. And she once told me the story of how she started this ministry. She said that she had been praying, I guess as nuns tend to do, and she was praying kind of this open prayer to God of, God, what do you want me to do, right? What is my call? What do you want from me? And so she's praying, and for some reason, she said, she kept on getting this kind of idea in her head, go to the prisons, which she didn't know what that was about, but she was getting this sense over and over, go to the prisons. And so eventually she works up the nerve to pick up her phone, dial the prison, say, I'd like to talk to the person in charge. Eventually a man gets on the other side of the line, says hello, and she says, hi, it's Sister Kathleen, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but, I'm just wondering, is there anything that I or anyone else could do to help the prisoners and their families? And the man on the other end of the line quickly said, well, in fact, yes, there are many things that can be done. And she said her initial emotional reaction inside was to think, uh-oh. Because she knew, rightly so, that it was going to mean change, it was going to be unexpected, it was going to probably mean some hardship. And even being a nun, she wasn't sure she was ready for all this. But ultimately, she said yes to God's call. She said yes to change and to unexpected journeys. And because of that, this ministry that she's led and really involves so many people in the community has just blessed thousands of people over the few years it's been around. So what place do you find yourself in your life? Right? What kind of place is it? Is it a place of joy, or is it a place of hardship? Is it an unexpected place that's maybe new and you don't know what to do? Or is it a place maybe that's the opposite? You know it so well that it's hard to even imagine a new call because it's so familiar to you. Do you hear God's call in the place that you're in, or is God's call getting hard to hear? I'm here to tell you today that wherever you are in life, God is calling you. And I know that because even though I can't tell you what your specific call is, Jesus once said that in one way, we all have exactly the same call. He said our call is to love God with all our heart and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And there's no place that you can't do that. And there is no person who is not able to do that so long as we're open to God's call. So I think ultimately it's just like I found when I was dropped unexpectedly in North Dakota. Every situation is an opportunity to hear God's call and to share God's love. This Lent and moving forward, I invite you to ponder how God is calling you to live your faith, to share his love right here and right now in the place you're in. God bless you. Amen.